What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another guide to Monster Hunter Rise. In this video we're going to be showing off a pre-Sunbreak build, this time for the Gunlance. Now what is a pre-Sunbreak build? Well, it's an endgame Monster Hunter Rise build that we can take into the start of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak to take on the early Master Rank monsters fairly comfortably. Of course, as we farm more and more monsters in Sunbreak, we will get Master Rank gear which will quickly replace the gear and builds shown off in these pre-Sunbreak builds, but these videos are designed to give you the best possible head start. But before we get into the video, a reminder that if you enjoy these builds, don't forget to leave a thumbs up on the video and consider subscribing to the channel, as we make builds for multiple games that highlight a variety of ways to play. When it comes to the Gunlance, it's in a little bit of an odd place in Monster Hunter Rise. The Gunlance could be divided into 3 playstyles, and this can dictate how you build the weapon. You have the Swing Lance playstyle, which utilizes the slow, wide swings with the lance that deal large amounts of damage combined with the burst fire with your shells. This playstyle tends to favor the normal type shells with the Gunlances. You then have the Charged Shelling playstyle, which is all about charging up your shelling attacks to deal massive fixed damage, and this tends to favor the long shelling type Gunlances. And then you have the wide Gunlances, which tends to favour a playstyle that can only be described as pokey bang bang, as in you poke with the lance and then fire a shell immediately after, rinse and repeat over and over again. Whilst of course there is some overlap between these playstyles, focusing on one of these playstyles can help you when it comes to choosing what type of build you want to create with the Gunlance. And so for this pre-Sunbreak build, I'm going to be utilising this Swing Lance playstyle and crafting a pre-Sunbreak balanced Gunlance build. So for this build you'll need the Kaiser Crown, Renalplos Mel S, the Basiljuice or Basilgeese Braces, Basiljuice Coil and Basiljuice Greaves. I'm also using an Absolute Petalace, although the Petalace is down to personal preference in all honesty. And when it comes to your talisman, of course no one has exactly the same talisman, so if you can, use a talisman that has as much weakness exploit on it as possible. Failing that, using something that has multiple tier 3 or tier 2 decoration slots could also be an option. And then for the weapon, I'm using the Arachnolance, which has the Wyvern exploit Rampage skill attached to it. Now how do you get this Rampage skill? As the Arachnokadaki Gunlance doesn't normally come with the Wyvern exploit Rampage skill. Well, it's all done by crafting the Gunlance in the tree above the Arachnokadaki tree, the Banahabra tree. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Craft it up to rarity 4 and then you'll be able to apply the Wyvern exploit Rampage skill to it. You can then upgrade it to the Arachnokadaki Gunlance and it will still have the Wyvern exploit Rampage skill attached to it. Wyvern exploit is a very powerful Rampage skill that increases damage against all Wyverns, and Wyverns are the most popular monster type in the game. Whilst this won't do anything against Elder Dragons or Fanged Beasts, this will definitely help when it comes to the majority of monsters in Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak. Now when it comes to the decorations, you've got a fair few to play around with, and some of them are kind of optional here. So I've gone for Jumping Jaws, 4 points in Evade Extender, Steadfast Jaws for points in Stun Resistance, Grinder Jaws for points in Speed Sharpening, Critical Jaws to max out Crit Boost, Sharp Jaws to max out Protective Polish, Tenderizer Jaws to max out Weakness Exploit, and a Brace Jaw for a point in Flinch Free. Like I said, some of these jaws, for example the Jumping Jaws, are optional and down to personal preference to how you like to play the weapon. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a raw attack of 200 with 27 fire rating. The fire rating is kind of an afterthought on this build in all honesty. Whilst yes, it will help us deal damage against monsters who are weak to fire, at least when we attack with the lance portion of the weapon, it's nonetheless a kind of byproduct of this build. Anyway, you'll then have White Sharpness with 40% base affinity, which can be 90% when you take into account Weakness Exploit, and you'll have level 5 normal shells. You'll then have a strong defense of 523 that is exceedingly strong against fire, neutral against water, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. As for the switch skills, these are down to personal preference. Now when it comes to the skills, first of all you have Critical Eye at level 3. Critical Eye is a skill that increases the base affinity of a build. You can put more points in Critical Eye if you want. Putting 2 more points into this will allow us to get to 50% base affinity and thus 100% affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points. However, this affinity and critting is only applied to the lance portion of an attack, as the shelling attacks cannot crit. You'll then have Critical Boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our critical attacks, but this only applies to the raw portion of an attack, so it doesn't apply to the elemental rating we have on the weapon as well as our shelling attacks. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3. Weakness Exploit is a skill that increases our affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us a bonus 50% affinity. You'll then have Protected Polish at level 3. Protected Polish is a useful quality of life skill that allows us to put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a duration of time. And as the Raknakodaki Gunlance only has a small portion of white sharpness, this skill works well in unison with the weapon. You'll then have Artillery at level 3, increases the damage of our shelling attacks. You'll then have Stun Resistance at level 3, a byproduct of the jewels we're using, negating all stun effects on our hunter. You'll also have Speed Sharpening at level 3, a result of the grinder jewels, increasing how quickly we can sharpen our weapon, and this also works well in unison with Protected Polish as it allows us to apply that protective coating more quickly. You'll then have Guard at level 2, which increases how effectively we can block monster attacks. This reduces the knockback as well as the stamina cost to block those said attacks. You'll then have Load Shells at level 2, which increases the loading capacity of the Gunlance by 1, increasing how many shells we have on the Gunlance we're using. You'll then have Evade Extender at level 2. Now this is a quality of life skill that I personally like to use with the Gunlance. One of the Gunlance's main issues is its mobility, or lack of it. An Evade Extender greatly helps when it comes to avoiding attacks, repositioning and more. This is the main reason why I haven't invested more points into Guard, as when it comes to the Gunlance in Monster Hunter Rise, I find it better to avoid attacks than actually block them. But it is still useful to have points in Guard in case you need to block an attack. And speaking of which, the next skill is Guard Up at level 1, allowing us to block unblockable attacks as well as reducing the damage taken from blocking those said attacks. You'll then have Slugger at level 1, which is a complete byproduct of the talisman we are using. It's not really needed on this build at all, but Slugger basically increases how effectively we can KO monsters. And then finally you'll have Flinch Free at level 1, reducing minor knockbacks from monsters as well as knockbacks from our allies. So there we have it, that is the balanced Gunlance build. As you can see, it is a little bit of a jack of all trades. It has many skills attached to it, and they all work well in unison with one another. But like I said, this is built for the Swing Lance playstyle. And whilst this can also be used with wide gun lances, one suggestion I would recommend would be the Admiral's Arbor Lance. This build won't work if you like the charged shelling playstyle, unfortunately. But nonetheless, this is a powerful build that I would recommend. But every build out there has pros and cons. No build is absolutely flawless. When it comes to this balanced Gunlance build, one of its biggest pros is its damage output. It has decent damage when you combine its affinity rating, crit boost skills, alongside the white sharpness, artillery, and level 5 normal shells. The next pro is that this build has quite a few quality of life and defensive skills. It has Guard, Evade Extender, Guard Up, Stun Resistance, and more, making hunts feel a little bit easier than they are. And finally is that despite this weapon being a fire weapon, it really can be used against any monster in the game, especially when you use it against wyverns. But alas, there are some cons. One of the biggest cons is unfortunately this build, well, it's a con for the Gunlance as a whole, is unfortunately you will eat through your sharpness really quickly. Yes, this is countered thanks to Protected Polish and Speed Sharpening, but it's still something you need to be aware of. And the other con is, unfortunately, the Raknakodaki Gunlance is lacking when it comes to pure raw attack. It's not the worst out there, and it's kind of negated thanks to the affinity-based skills, our level 5 normal shells and white sharpness, but it's still something that I would consider a con for the weapon. But to be honest, the pros far outweigh the cons for this build, and if you're a fan of the Gunlance, I'd recommend trying it out. I've had quite a bit of success with it, and it's quite fun to play, so long as you enjoy the Slap Lance or the Swing Lance playstyle. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a pre-Sunbreak build for the Gunlance in Monster Hunter Rise. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.